get my 6. Not yet, because per usual, I don't know if you can tell or not from looking behind me here, but I recently mowed again. It's mid-October now, so only one more mowing to go. I'll wait until the day after Halloween and mow again. Nostalgia. It's a strange thing. It can take you to a different time, a different place. While I was mowing, I had a very nostalgic feeling come over me that took me to a very strange place. And even though it's mid-October here in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, and hang in there, all these leaves back here, you give it 10 days. They'll all be different colors: yellow, red, crimson, purple, gold. It's just going to be gorgeous. I had nostalgia, and it took me to a place entirely different. Okay, it took me back to the South Pacific, to an island, well, it might have been October for all I know, but it seemed like summer because it was back in the Philippines where every day is like summer, 7 degrees above the equator, subtropical climate. I had a friend. He was a Vietnam veteran, and I think I've talked about this guy a couple times here on the channel. We called him Pizza the Hut, and here's why. He made oven-baked pizza. He had this little hut that he converted. I mean, it was not necessarily a hut. It was a house made out of cement, but he had converted part of it to like a bar. And it was on the beach, right on the beach. It was in Mindanao. I'm not going to say where in Mindanao. It's the southernmost major island of the Philippines. It was on the beach, and his business kind of grew from there. And I don't think he ever really technically, I mean, it was third world. You can set up shop on the street, and as long as you're not attacking people as they come by, you can sell your wares. That's what most folks do to make their money. So he would buy beer in bulk and some liquor in bulk at the getting places, whatever, mark it up a little bit. And he started to get a nice little collection of mostly expats that would hang out at the bar. But from there, might have some action here this afternoon. I'm going to speed up drinking my coffee, but I'm not going to speed up the story. It's got to be told properly. We started selling food. Simple things like sandwiches, burgers, Western type food though. Somewhere along the way, somebody said, hey, you should start selling pizza, because you literally, to find pizza, the closest pizza was a 2 to 3 hour bus ride from where we lived. There was no pizza anywhere. So this guy, we called him Pizza the Hut, like I said, 2 reasons. This is the first. He built like a stone oven in the back of his little place that he had converted to a bar and now a restaurant and now a pizza shop. And he would bake pizza inside that stone oven, and it was, to this day, the best pizza I've ever had in my life. So we lived in that area for about 2 years, and I'd gotten in the habit of going to see this guy a couple times a week, hanging out. Second reason that we called him Pizza the Hut, and he knew we weren't talking behind his back. He was huge, but not like, annoying neighbor of Crayon infamy. He was, I mentioned that video, he's a really big guy, but like not muscular, obese. This guy was not obese. He was muscular. He would have been in his mid-60s at the time. The guy was like 6'5", 320. He was a Hulk, just a hulking, massive man. I mean, he was, so that's why we called him Pizza the Hut. Number 2 reason. But I'd gotten the habit of going by his place around noon. He usually didn't open up until mid-afternoon because he usually didn't wake up till noon. But of course, I've always been a morning person. By noon, I'd already done my exercises, workouts, whatever. And if I just wanted to kind of go hang out, talk to a guy or the guys, I'd go to his place around noon. And a lot of times I would help him roll dough for the, you know, to make the pizza and just talk. He had a very beautiful Filipino wife and they had a little boy. And, you know, we had that veteran thing, 2 different wars, of course, him, Vietnam, me, Iraq, 2 different generations, but we could just really relate in such a way that I've found it hard to relate to a lot of people. We would sit at his bar and a lot of times, you know, he'd give me a beer when I would get there early and he'd be, you know, in the kitchen. Okay, I'm hearing footsteps behind me. You watch the forest. We had some very close, very loud tree knocks in yesterday's video. So I'd often spin my chair around though and I'd look at the beach. And it wasn't like, when you say beach, you think, oh, people laying out on towels. It was a fishing village. And remember, it's almost 90 degrees or 90 degrees plus there every day. And the sun is so hot. A lot of folks are hiding from the sun during the middle of the day. So I'd sit there in the shade and I'd watch the water glisten. The beach was predominantly empty. Even the fishermen go out at night. And that's part of the story. There was like a peninsula that went up the beach. And then over on the left side of the peninsula was a very small sound. And that's taking liberties to call this little portion of the inlet there a sound because it only had water in it when the high tide was in. It was more like an estuary, like a stream came down from off the mountains, but this was a very flat portion of land. So the stream flowed through there. It was always a stream. There was always a creek there about this wide. But when the tide would come in and the sound would fill up, it made for quite an estuary. And there was what appeared to be like a building. It had to have been a mile away, but you could still see it. Very, very small. So I was sitting there one day and my buddy, Pizza the Hut, he was back there rolling dough. He comes out and I'm like, what is up with that building? Does somebody live there? And he says, well, it's kind of like a lighthouse, but you know, there was no big light in it. Basically, it was a shout house. Since it was a fishing village, if the fishermen were to get caught into that estuary at night, when the high tide was in, they wouldn't be able to get their boats out of there if they missed the tide. And so somebody would man that house at night, like a lighthouse. And if they saw a boat coming, because the fishermen put little lights on their boats so that the commercial fishermen don't hit them, because these fishing boats for these, in these small Filipino fishing villages, they're maybe 8 feet long, about 1.5 feet wide. And these guys go out in them all night and catch a lot of squid and a lot of various types of fish. Dearly's sister Che Che's husband, Yung, I believe, last week caught a blue marlin. They call them tuna over there. Huge fish. I think they got something like 18,000 pesos by selling this fish. The average monthly income in the Philippines is 4,000 pesos, which is less than $100. They got 18,000 out of this one fish. It was a monster. I mean, almost like Old Man in the Sea, Ernest Hemingway, one of my favorite writers, not necessarily one of my favorite books by him, but it did win the Nobel Pulitzer or Nobel, both, something like that. So somebody would sit in this, it was like a guard shack. It was built up on stilts to protect, you know, the materials that the hut was made out of when the tide did come in. But somebody would pretty much hang out there all night. When they'd see the lights coming, they'd yell, pray, pray, like P-R-E, but you got to roll your tongue. Pray, which means friends. Hawa, go away, Hawa. So they knew they were getting into that estuary and they would go out wide, okay? And I thought of that because while I was mowing grass and I'm looking out and I'm seeing my grass, in the area that filled up with water every night, there was this beautiful bright green seagrass that looks like the grass here on my lawn in central Virginia, here in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. I was like, wow, I'd forgotten about that place. But it was so neat to get that shot of nostalgia looking at grass in Virginia and remembering the seagrass over in the Philippines. So my buddy, Pizza the Hut, he explained to me what that building was and whatnot. A couple of months went by, you know, no big deal. Never thought of that place again, other than when I'd see it when I'm sitting there, you know, at his place while he's rolling the dough. So I go over there one day, and his wife tells me that he's still at the market. He went out to buy food for the restaurant and to get the beers and all that stuff. She said, here, just wait. He'll be back, but he might be a while. So I'm sitting there, I'm looking out at the beautiful view. And for some reason I thought, I want to go walk to this shack. I mean, it was a mile away, but what's a mile to somebody that runs 5 to 8 miles a day, right? So and it was hot. That was the hardest part of it. I got a couple of bottles of water to stay hydrated. And I went to that shack. I got to it and everything was moist. The sand was wet and the seagrass was slimy. There was a ladder that you could crawl up to it. So I climbed up the ladder, and the place looked abandoned. And by the way, at one point, my buddy did tell me that they didn't really use it anymore. They just don't go fishing down that way anymore. And nobody, you know, had used it for quite some time. So I climb up there. I never attempted to go in. Why? Because that wasn't my house, and you just don't do that. You don't, you know. It was maybe 8 feet by 8 feet. It had like boarded up windows. There were the types of like shutters, wooden shutters. You could open them up, but they were closed. Door was closed. I didn't even try the knob. I mean, to tell you the door was locked would be a stretch, because I don't know. I mean, I just don't go into houses where I'm not invited. You know what I mean? So on the western side of the house, there was shade. It had been quite a hike. It took me about almost half an hour to get out there, because the sand, the soil being so moist, I was sinking into it. It took a little more effort. So I leaned up against the back of the house, or the hut, to take advantage of that shade. I drank my one bottle of water on the way out. So I opened up my other bottle of water, started drinking some water. It came over me that I was tired, and I ended up falling asleep. I don't know exactly how long I slept, but I was awakened by the sound of like a thud or a bang from what sounded like it was coming from inside the hut. And when I woke up, it occurred to me that the sun was on its way down and the tide was coming in. The area where I just walked a mile to get to was under about 6 to 8 inches of water. So I thought, well, I better get back to Pizza the Hut's place, or I'm going to have a long swim ahead of me. And about that time, just as I'm having that thought, I hear a thud and a whoosh, boom, whoosh, boom, whoosh, coming from inside the house. So I stood up slowly and I looked around the house again. The shutters were still shut. The wooden shutters were still shut. The door was still closed. And I just thought, well, there's somebody in there. Somebody's in there. Maybe they still do use this hut as a warning site, as a shout tower. Maybe my friend he's wrong. He doesn't have all the facts. But there's somebody obviously in here. So I climbed down the ladder, and I didn't feel threatened in any way. And the people over there were so friendly. If a guy or a woman had come out of that hut, they would have been very friendly. They would have said, hey, how are you? More than likely. But I made my way down the ladder, again, about 6 inches of water, and I start walking back to Pizza the Hut's little resto bar type house thing he had, whatever it was. It was like a little bit of everything. And I'm looking around, and it occurs to me, I don't see any footprints. No one had... It's weird. The sun's coming out and it's getting brighter, but I just felt like something cold passed by me. So I look around to where my tracks should have been, and they were gone. And again, like I mentioned, there was already 6 to 8 inches of water. The tide was coming in. So I just assumed whoever came and went up and got in that shack while I was up there sleeping, their tracks had been erased by the water as well. So it took me almost an hour to get back because I was trudging through water. And by the time I did get back, it was up to my knees. So I got back just in time and had some very, very delicious pizza, throwing back some cold ones. And I was telling Pizza the Hut and a couple of the other expats and a couple of local Filipino guys were there, used to hang out with us, about my hike for the day, the afternoon, my trek out to that hut. Well, one of the Filipino guys says, he goes, "Halaka." That's what they say when they get surprised. He says, "Atu ka dito?" Which means you went there? "Oo, tama." I said, yes, correct. And then he told us why they no longer use that hut. And it's a creepy story. And it's only taken me 15 minutes and 44 seconds to get to the point this time. Brah. Make that 1604. So here's the story. About a mile going the other way from the house, from the shout house, a fisherman came home early. The fishermen would go out just before dark and they wouldn't come back until about an hour or so after sunrise the next morning. Well, this guy had a suspicion that his oldest daughter was, she liked boys, okay? We'll make this PG rated. The mother was dead, his wife was dead, and she was about 18, 19, something like that. So he came home a couple hours early to surprise his daughter because he just had concerns because he didn't want her, you know, getting pregnant young, starting to have all these kids too young, and pretty much not getting to have, you know, the life that she could have if she had made better decisions. So he comes in and sure enough finds her with the young man from the village. And they were, how can I say it? They were getting to know each other in the biblical sense, but they were not having a Bible study session. You know what I mean? Well, the girl's dad beat the tar out of this young man. Actually, not just broke his leg, but broke his knee. Like, made him permanently physically disabled with what he did to him. Threw him out of the house. Pretty much told the daughter she was never allowed to leave the house. Well, a short while after that, you know, things are back to normal. The father's fishing all night. He's coming home a couple hours after sunrise. Finds out the daughter's gone. She'd run away. She'd left. So after a couple of days of her not coming back, the father started thinking, where could she be? Where could she be? Where could she be? And he just happened to be going by the shout house one night, okay? And he hears, "Howa, howa, go away, go away." And he recognizes the voice as being that young man that he had caught with his daughter. So he didn't howa, howa. He atu, which means went to the lighthouse. And he climbed up there. And he caught that young man and he found his daughter. And once again, he decides he's going to pummel this young man into a bloody pulp, but things didn't go his way. The young man ended up killing him, strangling him right in front of his daughter, who they say that drove her nuts. There really is no institution where in that area where she ended up in a very sad state. She's a street person, and the guy that killed the father was killed by their fellow villagers. That's just kind of how things go. In a lot of places, it really don't exist on maps. They used to call it street justice here in America. I don't know what you call it. Island justice, beach justice, third world, no one even knows you exist justice. They killed him. And the man that was telling us this story said no one has ever used that shout house since these events happened because they were afraid that it was going to be haunted by somebody. either the father who was murdered in the house, maybe even the daughter's boyfriend who walked with a limp, who when he would walk would make a sound like boom, boom. Time to go find it. So now the hunt is on. See you off more next time.